What is your opinion on having sex in the same room while pets have access to or are in the same room? Semi-unrelated, but my wife and I were discussing this. I found an opinion piece on it and tried to email it to my wife and accidentally sent it to the president of our HOA. My lizard just stares. Unmoving. Unblinking. Unfazed. We've always had cats and they just run away when we start having sex, they want no part of a bouncing bed lol. Sorry babe, the tarantula enclosure stays in the room during sex. Not a fan. Girlfriend's Jack Russell bit my ass because it thought I was hurting her, that or it wanted some of this sweet rump steak. My wife and I got a dog after we got married. The dog is very attached to me and has to be in the same room at all times. We started locking her out during sexy time because she would just jump on the bed and investigate sometimes. Locking her out made the dog upset, so she would literally slam her body against the door. Then we decided to give her a treat that takes a bit of time to chew on. She accepted this and stopped trying to knock down the door. However, now when me and wife are cuddling and watching TV, and maybe kiss each other, the dog gets really excited and starts begging for her treat. Basically me and my wife can't kiss infant of our dog or she freaks out because she thinks it's time for a treat. Pavlov's dog gone terrible wrong. I do it all the time. My fish doesn't seem to care. A girl I was seeing had a mastiff. AKA, big fucking dog. I remember looking over while we were shacking up and I just saw his dead-eyed stare in the dark. My opinion is that was enough to unnerve me. Was deaf weird when my cat jumped on her back during. He was just riding there. We tend to kick the cats out. The wife suddenly throwing the cats out of the bedroom is generally a good sign of things to come. They're gonna be let in a few minutes later anyway. Edit. Told my wife about this post and she reminded me of the time we thought we had kicked both cats out. As we started to get busy, we were interrupted by an urgent scrapping at our bedroom door. It was our youngest cat trying to escape from the sheer horrors happening in the room. The absolute panic in her eyes is a sight myself, and the cat will take to the grave. It would be embarrassing to watch my dog watching or jump into bed at that moment. No, especially when either a cold nose gets stuck where it doesn't belong or a set of claws takes a swipe at dangling things going back and forth. If he can lick his dick in front of me, he can handle that. It's uncomfortable, but our cats stay in the room while we do it. Usually they just ignore us while we're doing the deed. One of them has a staring habit, but she had a litter, so it ain't exactly like she's innocent. Long ago, doggy doing my wife, our female golden retriever started doggy doing me, making a doggy train for about 2 seconds. NSFW people who have found a dead body, what's the story? In 1999, I woke up and said good morning to my wife and asked if she wanted a coffee. She did not respond. I went to the kitchen, had breakfast and a coffee. I was getting ready to go to the store as we needed some provisions, and I went to tell my wife that I would be back in 45 minutes. As I walked through our front door, it dawned on me that she had never slept through me saying anything to her, ever. I went back to our bedroom and touched her arm, and it was ice cold. As she was on her side, I rolled her over, and the side of her face that was on her pillow was black, blue, and red. This was a result of the blood pooling. I called 911, and they advised me to give her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. I argued that this was unnecessary as she was quite obviously dead. The 911 operator convinced me otherwise, and I started to give her mouth-to-mouth. I tasted death as it was the worst tasting event of my life. I knew then that my beautiful wife was dead, and life as I knew it would be forever changed for the worst. The coroner told me that she died from an abscessed tooth that broke and entered her bloodstream. She had died about 6 hours earlier, and I never noticed. It will be 24 years on June 16th, and still think about her all the time. Was laying in bed watching TV with my GF at the time, and her dad had moved in with us recently. Heard the loudest snoring ever coming out of his room real early, and we almost went to check on him but figured he just had a long night and was exhausted. Got up, went throughout the day breakfast, chores, all the Saturday morning stuff we'd do. 2 p.m. rolls around and he still hasn't come out of his room. Had a bad feeling, so I kicked the door in and found him sitting there in his underwear, pale bluish-white eyes and mouth open. Apparently he'd gone out with some friends and they gave him some dope which turned out to be mostly fentanyl. The snoring we heard was a death rattle and he was already dead before we even went to sleep. Someone I know retired from the Royal Mail because he found someone. He looked through the letterbox of an elderly lady who usually came to the door for him but he hadn't seen in a week. She had had a stroke and fallen on a plug-in heater. I was lucky enough to not have to find my father or stepfather when they took their own lives, but I had to help police navigate to the spot my dad did it. I did, however, find my grandmother when she passed. We were really close most of my life and I had moved in with her while I was sobering up and going through a divorce. She had started progressing in her dementia and honestly taking care of her was exactly what I needed at that moment. I don't know if I could have done it for anyone else, but it was kind of cathartic that I was helping feed the woman who taught me how to use a fork. She was pleasant most of the time, but she'd get scared when she was confused and didn't know where/what was going on, so I'd just have her snuggle up on my shoulder and tell her stories about us in a calm voice until she felt better, remembering how many times she'd done that for me. I'd gotten an opportunity to move and do some dream work in my dream city, so my mother was going to take over caring for her when I moved. I was all packed, had the car loaded and everything when I went to wake her to say goodbye. She was laying on the floor beside the bed. I called out her name and no response. I rushed over to see if I needed to do CPR and when I laid my hand on her arm she was cold to the touch. I literally googled what to do when you find grandma dead. Then called the non-emergency line, the police, an EMT came to pronounce her, and the coroner's office stopped by. Then the funeral home came to get her. My grandma had given me one last gift on her way out. A chance to finally grieve a natural death after a life very well lived, and the peace of knowing I wasn't leaving her behind. You and me grandma, you and me. This is the classic domestic violence story of man kills woman because if I can't have her nobody else will story. At 14 I woke to find my mother with a shotgun hole in her chest under the kitchen table and her murderer outside under the clothesline with his brains blown out. The only difference between this and other stories like this is I am the kid who wasn't murdered with her mother. Edit. Some people asked how is it possible to sleep through a shotgun blast, and well, let's ride this horse a little longer and I will open up more about this in my recollections. I am old, this happened in the 80s. So story continued. I don't fucking know. I honestly don't, I think my brain protected me. It kept me asleep. But let me tell you what it was like to wake up to that. I woke up at 9 AM, I know it was 9 AM because I looked at the clock and wondered what the fuck was going on. You see, she was leaving him that morning with me. We were meant to have left at 4 AM and I could not understand why I was still there and where was everybody, including 3 inside dogs. So two things: it was 9 AM and the house was dead silent just like the movies, not one fucking sound, no birds, no sound of life except me wandering around the house with increasing frequency looking for my mother and John, that was his name. I walked past both of them multiple times. I did not see them. At some point I must have started to panic because when I noticed the dogs locked up in a downstairs room I knew something was wrong, very very wrong. It was after that I am standing in the kitchen and I see a foot with my mother's furry slipper on it underneath the kitchen table. I move the table, and I am sorry to say this but even after 35 years this is the first thing I see when I think of my mother, a gaping hole in her chest and blood coagulated on her glasses. I don't know how long she was laying there. At the same time I wanted to do something. I knew there was nothing to be done. Then I started looking for John and that is when I saw him under the clothesline. I went closer to him too and I remember a hole in his head but not much more. That was when I called 000, OST 911. Ran out of the house and started screaming for my auntie. We lived in a farm and she lived on a house not far from us. Then everything sort of gets blank till the ambulance got there. My boyfriend was a Marine veteran who served in Afghanistan. I went to go pick up lunch because he hadn't eaten all day and just said goodbye to his nana who was on life support in the hospital. I asked him to come with me, he said he'd rather be alone. I figured he didn't want me to see him grieving, but that he'd put coffee on for us. I got back to his house, smelled the coffee, called his name, then saw that the dog was sitting in the hallway, ears pinned back, and wouldn't move. I looked in the living room and found him on the floor. I thought he was napping. The brain is a hell of a thing. He sometimes slept on the floor, so instead of noticing the gore my brain told me he was napping. I told him to get up, lunch was here. He didn't move or respond. I went closer and noticed his body was in a weird position to be comfortable for sleeping. I ran over, saw blood coming from his nose, his eyes wide open and stained yellow, then I realized I was inches from kneeling in his brain matter and shattered skull. He told me his gun was locked up, told his dad he didn't even have his gun at the house. Fucked me up forever, and I'll never stop regretting leaving him alone. End veteran suicide. Rest in sweetest peace, my Joe. My mom wasn't answering her phone on Mother's Day. It wasn't abnormal as she had been like that ever since my dad passed away in May of 2018. This year was the 5-year anniversary of his passing, and on the day, would have been 55 years of marriage had he not passed. Her neighbor messaged me saying he couldn't get a hold of her. That's when I knew something was wrong. Her neighbor was close with her and was always there helping her. I think he secretly had a thing for her as they were both the same age. She always answered him even if she didn't want to be bothered. I drove over there earlier than I was supposed to. She was deaf so she couldn't talk on the phone, but she would always text. I walked in the house and didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. I walked into the back bedroom of her second-floor master bedroom, and as I started going through the door I saw her knees on the bed, so I thought she was just sitting there. As I walked a little closer I saw a gun in her lap. I knew what had happened. I called the police and got out of the house and threw up on the front lawn. I'm a disabled army vet. I've seen some fucked up things. I have never seen anything like that. It's the worst thing I've ever seen and I can't unsee it. Every day I wake up and see her laying there. Blood and brain matter all over everything. She had tricked her neighbor into loading the gun for her, so he felt horrible too. It was just all around awful. Edit, thanks for all the kind words. It's been nice talking about it like this for me. I haven't really been able to talk with anybody about it. The only people around me are in the same boat, minus me being the one to find her. It hasn't been easy for us to talk about it amongst each other. I'm sure it will become easier as time goes on and we'll be able to reflect upon happier times, but for now I guess we have to sit in this pain. Edit 2, thanks again for the outpouring of support. You know, it's funny how life plays out. I wasn't a good kid. I got in trouble all the time, whether it be for fighting or cussing at teachers or what have you. There was one time when I was a kid, that I was grounded. As a kid I loved to go fishing, and it was probably my only real hobby because I live in a small town. I snuck out while grounded to meet up with a couple neighborhood kids to fish because my mom and dad's best friends were in town. A couple days go by and I hadn't got caught, so I thought I was in the clear. I had to walk about 1.5 miles home from school because I got suspended from riding the bus. I beat up a bully who was closed fist punching his GF on the back of the bus. How stupid is that? So it took a little while for me to get home after school. Meanwhile, Mad Dad worked a ways away and would stop at the gas station on his way home, grab a pack of cigs and a copy of the local paper. I get home, and they both look pissed. Why, you ask? Well, as it turns out, I had gotten my picture taken along with my friends, while we were on the dock. And it was on the front page with an article about Sumner finally being here and what the kids in town we doing to have fun. I got grounded for 2 months to the yard. Fast forward to a couple weeks ago when I'm going through my parents' stuff, and I am going through my dad's dresser boxes, and what do I find but a clip out of that newspaper article in a box of my dad's cherished possessions. It never occurred to me that they punished me even without wanting to. My dad was a huge fan of fishing. So I know he was at least a little proud of me even though he had to punish me for disobeying them. That brought me a lot of comfort. My freshman year of college, right during winter finals, my closest college friend who liked to prank me was in his bed, ignoring his alarm. His roommate came to get me to wake him up. It was a lofted bed. I figured it was a setup. I climbed up there and immediately knew something was horribly wrong and yelled for someone to call for help. His face is still burned into my mind, over 20 years later. I would describe it as scared, with his eyes wide open and his mouth agape as if he were gasping or trying to scream. His hands gripped his sheets tightly. An hour plus of attempts to revive him in the dorm hallway failed. We found out later that he grew up with heart-related issues and his aorta tore in his sleep, before his 19th birthday. Before we leaned the cause, I barely slept for weeks. I was terrified whatever got him was getting me next because we spent so much time together. All these years later, and I'm still in loose contact with his family. My wife died suddenly in the shower 3 years ago. No scream, just collapsed. I thought she had dropped a bottle of shampoo, but when I went to check on her, dead. Tried doing chest compressions with Ems on the phone, didn't work. I was beside myself with grief and guilt for 3 days, until the autopsy revealed a tear in her aorta. There was nothing I could have done to save her. I am still traumatized by the suddenness, the unfairness of it all. The fact we didn't even get a minute to say goodbye, and she's just gone. I want to thank the community at r/widowers which supplied me, and many others in the same situation, with grief counseling. Edit, wow. I want to thank everyone for their kind words of sympathy. My wife was 53 at the time, 1 week before her 54th birthday. I had already bought her a bottle of fancy sake to share on her birthday, but I had to raise a glass by myself, to her ashes. The autopsy stated the actual cause of death was hemopericardium brought on by an aortic dissection. She had been complaining of lower back pain for 2 weeks before she died, because blood was leaking out and pooling in her lower back. We had assumed she might have a kidney stone that was causing the pain. There was nothing that could have been done for her aside from open heart surgery. Like a lot of you who are commenting, I had no idea people could die so quickly from this. I assumed we die from a long illness, or maybe something quicker like a car accident. But there would still be time to turn to each other and hold hands, and say our I love you instead of dying alone in a tub. I still ugly cry about it once in a while. Our cats need me, so I power through the despair. Be kind to one another. I was a caregiver for a few months, and during that time I primarily took care of a man in his 60s who had dementia after suffering a stroke. This guy could barely speak and had no idea what year it was, and as a result couldn't really communicate what he was feeling. He had a sister who lived him, but basically did nothing for him besides take his disability money. I started noticing something strange a few days before it happened. He was weirdly quiet and wasn't having BMS. One night I put him to bed at the end of my shift at 8 p.m. and drove home. I remember it was pissing rain and I was listening to Riders on the Storm, LOL, and I felt like something bad was going to happen. The next morning I came into my shift at 9 a.m. and my client's sister was on her way out to run errands or something, and I came inside and started to get my client's meds ready and clocked in. I then walked over to my client's room and opened the door. The first thing I noticed was a sweet fragrance, and I saw my client in the dark with his hand up in the air like he was grabbing something. I figured he had finally had a BM at night and I would have to clean it up. So I walked over to him and noticed he was completely still and had vomit all over his chest, and his mouth was agape with his eyes open. I reached over to his hand and to my horror it was unbelievably cold. Any of you who have felt a dead body know what I mean, it just feels so fucking wrong to the touch. So I called 911, I told them what happened. Meanwhile I'm sobbing and just fully having a mental breakdown. The cops come and interview me. They asked the sister the last time she had checked on him. She told them that she saw him last night when I was putting him to bed at 8 p.m. She had not checked on him at all that night. For 13 hours he was in bed without anyone checking in on him. The autopsy said he had a massive heart attack that night, and based on how cold he was, I'm guessing he had died shortly after I left. Shit haunts me to this day. I was 8 years old. Came home from school to find my dad had come home early from work. Went into house, saw wallet and wedding ring on kitchen table and found him dead in my bed clutching my teddy bear. That was a lot of years ago but forever crystal clear. Edit, thanks for all the messages. I am traveling abroad so not able to answer everyone but realize I left this a bit brief. My dad was an early patient for quadruple bypass heart surgery. At that time, the 5-year mortality rate was not good. He told a coworker/best friend he wasn't feeling well and left work early. We have always assumed he knew what was happening and got home, removed jewelry and wallet and passed away. I do have quite a few memories and lots of people have told me how proud he was of me. I think he went to be close to me and didn't expect me to find him. There is a long, insignificant story behind how I ended up being the one and not my mom. It definitely sucked for quite a while but moving and kind of starting over helped. I have great friends and a great family with 3 boys of my own. On my way to work at 3:30 in the morning. I was carpooling with 2 other guys. We were going through Woolcott, CT. Anyone that knows that area knows there's a lot of woods. Anyway, I noticed brake lights that were illuminated behind some trees so I pulled over to check it out. It was this red SUV blasting reggaeton. The driver had his head slumped down like he was sleeping. I noticed about 20 open beers in the back seat so we thought he was just drunk. We started to knock on the door to wake him up while we waited for the cops to show up. About 5 minutes later a cop car pulls up. Officer goes to the driver's side and turns on his flashlight. The second it turned on we immediately saw the bullet holes on the side of the driver's side door. In like less than a minute there was at least 10 Colombian pesos cars shutting everything down. Dude had just freshly died in a car wreck. Was driving at 11 p.m. to a Waffle House for some damn fine chicken and waffles. I'm about 900 feet driving 80 to the exit off-ramp when a car flies by me doing what seemed like at least 100 mph plus. I watched him not slow down enough for the turn, then he started going off the road to the left, overcorrect, then lose control of his car, and drive into a guardrail full speed. I'm obviously first one to the crash, dust still hadn't settled from the impact. The car was low enough that the front hood had gone under the rail and was wedged in between it and the road. As the driver wasn't wearing his seatbelt, groan, his lifeless body was smashed between the steering wheel, dashboard, and the roof of his car. Dude was smushed like a grape. I used my car to block the scene so first responders could arrive. There was nothing to do except unwedge his car and collect him. He was pronounced dead on the scene. I watched the news the next night make a small mention of his death, but that was it. Never got his name. The chicken and waffles had no flavor and I didn't sleep that night at all. Wear your seatbelt and slow the fuck down. My uncle was supposed to take my dad to a doctor's appointment and never turned up. I went to check and found him dead on his living room floor. Do not recommend. I was 21. I woke up around 9:30 or 10. I peeked in my mom's room to say good morning. Her TV was on but she wasn't there. She liked to use the bathroom in the master bedroom if it was available, more privacy I guess, and the door to the master was cracked so I figured oh she's in the bathroom, let me take the dogs outside to do their thing. Well about 10 minutes later I come back inside and she's still not in her room so I go peek inside the master to see if she's feeling okay. It's dark and I see her asleep on a recliner. So I call out mom a few times quietly and then go to nudge her knee and she is ice. Fucking cold. I finally look up at her face and realize she's dead and has been for a while, maybe a few hours. Mouth hanging open staring into the nothing, she's completely pale and her lips were blue. It was the most traumatic thing I have ever experienced and it has really fucked me up. That woman was my absolute best friend in the entire world. They said she had a heart attack. It will be 7 years this July and the thought of seeing her like that still makes my anxiety skyrocket. If you read this far, thanks. Rip Mama. What is your favorite insult that doesn't sound like an insult? Common customer service technique I use, customer is ranting and yelling on the phone and I don't say anything or try to interrupt. Then when they pause and ask if I'm still there, I say yes, I was just waiting for you to finish. Takes the wind out of their sails every time. You're at the top of the bell curve. From the movie Spanglish, maybe your low self-esteem is just common sense. If someone asks for a work reference, you can say, any employer would be lucky to get this person to work for them. It's impressive how you manage to stay so confident. It's hard to underestimate you. You continue to meet expectations. I once made a moderately humorous remark among some friends and one person said to me, "That's the funniest thing you've ever said." I think they meant well but it really was quite the burn. Deleted. I will give your suggestion all of the consideration which it deserves. Winky face. There's a Yiddish one, I hope someone names a child after you. It sounds nice until you realize that Jews don't name children after living relatives. The one New Zealand minister said for people that left to Australia, they rise IQ for both countries. See you later. Not if I see you first. This has become so common in language that people don't realize it's an insult. You're literally saying if I see you first, I'm going to avoid you. I hope the rest of your day is as pleasant as you are. Anyone else here to step up their game for shower arguments?